Welcome to the adventure of the Trinity Apparition, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock, before Baker Street, playing in the year 1873. Though I have long been the chronicler of my friend Sherlock Holmes, the tales of his earliest years remained unknown to me until now. A recent discovery of papers from his university days, letters and journals preserved by his friend Victor Trevor, sheds light on the cases that first forged his remarkable mind, long before our meeting at Baker Street. From this remarkable collection, I shall begin with an affair that demonstrates his nascent genius, in the face of collegiate superstition and cunning. This first account is titled, The Adventure of the Trinity Apparition. Chapter 1. During my university days I first met Mr. Sherlock Holmes. We shared modest lodgings, warmed by a crackling fire. Its light danced on walls, adorned with scientific charts, and the curious tools of Holmes's many interests. On a bleak November evening, a biting wind whistled at the window panes. A distant college bell clanged, marking the hour. Through it all, Holmes sat hunched over a chemical experiment, the gentle hiss of a bubbling retort the only sound from his corner. The studious silence was broken by heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by a sharp rap at our door. It was the postman. I retrieved a small bundle of letters, and upon seeing the familiar crest on one envelope, I passed it to my companion. "This one is from Victor Trevor, Holmes." "It appears rather urgent," commented Dr. John Watson. Holmes set down his glass retort with a delicate click. He took the letter but did not open it at once. Instead, he turned it over in his long, thin fingers, his grey eyes alight with a familiar spark of inquiry as a faint smile touched his lips. "Trevor is agitated, Watson. Note the hastily pressed seal, the wax bleeding beyond his family crest. For a man of such precise habits this is telling. What trifle, I wonder, has so unnerved him?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. He slit the envelope with a paper knife. The crisp tear of the paper was startlingly loud in the quiet room. He scanned the contents, his brow furrowed for a moment before he began to read passages aloud, his voice taking on the excited tenor of our friend. "My dear Holmes, you must lend your singular talents to a most baffling affair here at Trinity. A ghost! Yes, a veritable spectre is said to haunt the rooms of one Lord Edmund Ashworth. A shimmering, indistinct figure, seen by Ashworth himself, and, on one occasion by his gyp, a fellow named Davies. Most dismiss it as an undergraduate prank of unusual complexity," explained Sherlock Holmes. He paused, tapping a finger on the page. His eyes narrowed. "Interesting. The letter continues. Yet the affair has taken a more serious turn. During the most recent visitation, a small but immensely valuable signet ring, an Ashworth heirloom, has vanished from a locked drawer. The apparition, it seems, has a taste for larceny. 2 nights later, we were in the hired rooms of our small society, which Holmes had christened the Dilettante Detectives Club. The air was thick with pipe smoke. A low murmur of a dozen earnest young men filled the space, punctuated by the clink of a glass or the scrape of a chair on the wooden floor. "Hadden." One stout fellow, a student of theology, was arguing passionately, his voice booming through the haze. "It is a manifestation, a tortured soul crying out from the ether." "We must not dismiss the signs," responded theology student. Another, a cynic by nature, scoffed loudly in response, tapping the ash from his pipe into a tray with a sharp clatter. "A prank, I tell you. Ashworth is insufferable. Someone has contrived this elaborate mummery simply to make a fool of him. The stolen ring is merely a flourish to add credence to the tale." Cynical student said. "Spirits on one hand, elaborate pranks on the other. It seems they have covered every possibility except the truth," asked Dr. John Watson. Throughout the proceedings Holmes had remained silent. He leaned back in his chair, his fingertips pressed together, an island of calm in the sea of chaotic speculation. As the debate reached a fever pitch, His voice finally cut through the noise, sharp and clear as ice. "You are all missing the fundamental question. You ask, is it a phantom? You debate, is it a prank? These are irrelevant starting points. The only question of merit is this: who stands to gain from the disappearance of the ring?" replied Sherlock Holmes. A sudden quiet fell over the room, the only sound the hiss of the gas lamps. With a single sentence, he had swept away the cobwebs of ghosts and rivalries to expose the practical core of the matter. He stood, his lean frame silhouetted against the light. The apparition is a mere stage dressing, a puff of smoke to obscure the actions of a common thief. But a thief who employs such theatricality is a thief of uncommon intellect. This is no longer a case for dilettantes. Watson, pack your bag. We shall take the morning train to Cambridge. Our arrival at Trinity College was marked by the solemn chime of a great clock, its toll echoing across the manicured lawns and ancient stone. In the distance I could hear the faint, cheerful shouts of students at their sport. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and old books. Holmes strode ahead, his lean figure a dart of energy against the grey backdrop of the great court, his keen eyes sweeping over every Gothic arch and mullioned window, as if committing the very soul of the place to memory. We were directed to a set of rooms in Wheels Court, our footsteps ringing on the stone staircase. Before a heavy oak door, Holmes paused, his head cocked to one side. A faint, rhythmic scratching could be heard from within. He knocked sharply, and the sound ceased abruptly. The door was opened by a young man whose silk dressing gown and imperious expression announced him at once as our client, Lord Edmund Ashworth. "You are Holmes? I confess I expected someone older. Do come in. I suppose we must get this absurdity over with," answered Lord Edmund Ashworth. The rooms were the very picture of undergraduate luxury: velvet curtains, shelves of leather-bound volumes, and a decanter of sherry gleaming on a polished table. A low fire sputtered in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Ashworth gestured vaguely towards an armchair, the silk of his dressing gown rustling with the movement. He seemed far more troubled by the prospect of ridicule than by any supernatural visitation. "Lord Ashworth, my age has little bearing on the matter. You will oblige me by recounting the events precisely as they occurred. Omit nothing, no matter how trivial it may seem," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Ashworth sighed, a weary sound, and ran a hand through his hair. He spoke of a sudden, intense chill that would fall upon the room, of a faint, whispering sound that seemed to form his name, and of a shadowy form glimpsed at the periphery of his vision. As he spoke, I listened intently, but it was a tale long on atmosphere and conspicuously short on facts. "It's a prank, of course, some jealous fool from Caius, no doubt, but it is confoundedly well done. The cold, it is quite real, I assure you," answered Lord Edmund Ashworth. Holmes fell silent, his keen eyes darting from corner to corner as he began his meticulous examination. With cat-like tread he paced the length of the Persian rug. The soft tap of his knuckles on oak panelling punctuated the silence, followed by the rustle of his coat as he peered up the chimney. Finally, the whisper of his gloved finger along the window sash preceded his close inspection of whatever minute evidence he had gathered. "Interesting," declared Sherlock Holmes. He murmured the word, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, with sudden animation, he continued, "Watson, come here. Do you see? The dust is uniform everywhere, except this patch of floorboard before the bookcase." He paused, allowing me to approach. "Now, observe closely. Do you notice those faint, yet distinct scratches upon the varnish?" stated Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes, they are almost invisible. What could have made them?" Dr. John Watson added. I knelt and saw precisely what he meant. Fine lines etched into the varnish, almost invisible unless caught by the light from the window. As I pondered their origin, the latch on the door clicked softly, and it creaked open. A thin, stooping man entered, carrying a hod of coal, his boots shuffling quietly on the floorboards. He moved with a quiet deference, his eyes fixed upon the floor. "That will be all, Davies. I do not require a fire," said Lord Edmund Ashworth. But Holmes turned, his gaze fixing the servant with a sudden intensity that made the man start. "One moment. You are Mr. Davies, the college gyp? You have been in this room when his lordship has been absent," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The servant, Davies, clutched the coal-hod to his chest, as if it were a shield, his knuckles white. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, reedy whisper. It was laced with a tremor that seemed to catch on every other word, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Aye, sir. That I have. I've seen the thing, sir. The cold shadow, right by that bookcase. A truly unnatural presence. It fair chills the blood, it does," Mr. Davies said. After the servant had shuffled out, closing the door with a soft click, a profound silence filled the room. It was broken only by the steady ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes stared at the door through which Davies had departed, a peculiar, knowing smile playing upon his lips. "A man of deep feeling, our Mr. Davies. His terror is most convincing, perhaps too convincing. Watson, our investigation requires a different perspective. We have heard from the haunted, now we must hear from the observer. Trevor spoke of a Miss Winfield, a lady of some intellect within your little club of detectives. I believe she is our next port of call," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Too convincing, Holmes?" The man seemed genuinely terrified to me. Dr. John Watson inquired. Holmes simply smiled, that familiar glint of the hunt in his eyes. He offered no further explanation, leaving me to ponder the curious case of the frightened servant as we prepared to depart. The three of us, Holmes, Victor Trevor and myself, left the college servant Mr. Davies and stepped back into the grand, echoing archways of Trinity's great court. The air, cool and smelling of ancient stone and damp ivy, did little to clear the fog of uncertainty that had settled in my mind. Holmes, however, seemed not perplexed but invigorated, his long strides eating up the flagstones as the distant chime of a clock tower marked the afternoon. "The man's testimony is a shade too perfect, gentlemen. It is polished, like the silver he tends. Fear makes a man's memory fragmented, not fluent," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Before either Trevor or I could reply, a voice, crisp and articulate, cut through the quiet courtyard. We turned to see a young woman approaching, a stack of books held securely in her arms. She was not dressed in the height of fashion, but her tweed walking suit was practical, and her gaze was remarkably direct and intelligent. I recognized her at once from Holmes's small, informal circle of peculiar specialists. "Mr. Holmes." "Gentlemen, I had a notion I might find you here. The talk of Lord Ashworth's phantom has reached even the studious confines of Girton." "I presume you are not merely admiring the architecture," responded Miss Charlotte Winfield. "Miss Winfield, your timing is, as ever, impeccable. We are indeed plumbing the depths of this collegiate ghost story. Your own insights into the social currents of this place would be invaluable," replied Sherlock Holmes. The four of us found a secluded alcove in the college library, a place where the scent of old paper and leather binding hung heavy in the air. Miss Winfield leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that seemed to be absorbed by the ancient books surrounding us. "Lord Ashworth is roundly despised. It is not merely his title, it is his manner. He has a talent for making other men feel small. There are at least a dozen students who would gladly orchestrate a prank to humiliate him. Most notable among them is a Mr. Pembroke, a fine scholar who believes Ashworth's influence cost him the Grayson Prize last term," replied Miss Charlotte Winfield. Holmes absorbed this information, his fingertips steepled beneath his chin. After a moment of profound silence, he snapped the dusty folio on the table shut, the sound echoing in the stillness. He was on his feet in an instant. "Excellent. You have provided the very context we were lacking. Now, gentlemen, We must apply this newfound pressure to our original source. Come, Sherlock Holmes responded. The three of us, for Miss Winfield had departed to her own studies, made our way to the servants' quarters, a cramped and winding warren of passages behind the opulent dining hall. The air grew thick with the smell of beeswax and boiled cabbage. We found Mr. Davies in a small, dimly lit pantry, his back to us as he polished a silver candelabra. The rhythmic scrape of cloth on metal ceased as Holmes cleared his throat. Mr. Davies, a moment, if you please. In the confusion of that night, you may have overlooked something. Cast your mind back. Was there anyone else in the vicinity of Lord Ashworth's quarters? A student, perchance? Davies pivoted to face us, his expression a study in practised deference. Yet as he dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief, I caught a glimmer in his eye that spoke of rapid mental arithmetic. Sir, it is not my place to speak ill of the young gentleman, but since you press me, I did see Mr. Pembroke. He was hurrying away, looking for all the world like a fox startled from a henhouse. He nearly dropped something, responded Mr. Davies. Dropped something? What was it, man? Be specific, Dr. John Watson commented. A cufflink, sir. I saw it glint under the gaslight. Silver, it was, with a sort of beast engraved upon it. A griffin, I believe. I know Mr. Pembroke wears such a set, remarked Mr. Davies. The detail was so specific, so perfectly damning, that both Trevor and I felt a surge of triumph. We had our man. Holmes, however, merely offered the servant a thin, knowing smile that did not reach his eyes. He thanked Davies for his candour, and we retreated back into the courtyard, the heavy pantry door clicking shut behind us. And there we have it, gentlemen. The red herring, served on a silver platter, replied Sherlock Holmes. A red herring? But Holmes, the detail was impeccable. The griffin cufflink. It corroborates everything Miss Winfield suggested about Pembroke's animosity, responded Victor Trevor. My dear Trevor, it corroborates too well. A truly frightened man offers fragments, not a finished portrait of guilt. Davies did not witness an event. He recited a script. By pointing so perfectly to Pembroke, he has inadvertently pointed a second, far more telling finger at himself. We shall let him believe his little drama has found its audience. For tonight, Watson and I shall take up a vigil in Lord Ashworth's rooms, and witness this apparition for ourselves, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Lord Ashworth's rooms were opulent, but the heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany could not dispel the chill of anticipation. We sat in near total darkness, the only light a sliver of moon piercing the gloom. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled the leaded glass of the window frames. At Holmes's insistence, the fire was out, leaving the hearth a black, gaping maw. The silence was so profound I could hear the soft rustle of Trevor's coat as he shifted beside me, and the faint, rhythmic creak of my own chair. Must we endure this infernal darkness? My nerves are frayed to breaking point. I feel as though I'm awaiting my own burial, replied Lord Edmund Ashworth. Ashworth's voice was a strained whisper from the adjoining bedroom. Holmes, a fixed silhouette against the window, made no reply. Patience, Ashworth. Holmes knows his business, Victor Trevor said. A disgruntled sigh echoed from the other room. Time stretched on, each passing minute heightening our tension, until the solemn chime of the college clock tower struck midnight, its resonant tones seeming to vibrate through the very floorboards. The ensuing silence was broken by a new sound, the faint, rhythmic creak of a floorboard in the passage outside. My own heart hammered against my ribs. I held my breath, listening. It began, not with a sound, but with light. Near the far wall, the darkness began to glow, a faint, ethereal luminescence coalescing into a wavering, human-like shape. A low, guttural moan filled the room, seeming to come from the very air itself. Beside me, Trevor let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. The glowing pillar drifted silently across the room, passing before the empty fireplace. As it drew near, A peculiar odour reached my nostrils, sharp and acrid, like a struck match. But there was another note to it, a fragrant, cloying sweetness, entirely out of place. I glanced at Holmes. He had leaned forward, his focus absolute. He was not watching the spectre, he was inhaling its essence. Fascinating, Sherlock Holmes said. His voice was a low murmur, sharp with intellectual excitement. The glowing figure reached the far wall, flickered violently, and dissolved, plunging the room back into profound blackness. The strange scent lingered for a moment more, then vanished. "Good heavens, Holmes! What on earth was that? Did you see it?" remarked Victor Trevor. "I saw it, Trevor. More importantly, I smelled it. No ghost of antiquity reeks of phosphorus and rare Chinese incense. We are not dealing with the supernatural, but with a chemist of some talent," Sherlock Holmes said. Before I could process his words, the bedroom door was flung open with a crash. Lord Ashworth stumbled into the doorway, his breathing ragged. His face was pale, not with ghostly terror, but with a fresh and very human panic, as he pointed a trembling finger towards his writing desk. The ghost. It was a distraction. My signet ring, the Ashworth signet. It is gone, Lord Edmund Ashworth replied. The spectral chill of the previous night had not yet left my bones when the sharp, insistent sound of frantic pounding echoed up the stairwell to our lodgings. It was barely dawn, the Cambridge sky a uniform slate grey, and the sound was an unwelcome intrusion against the quiet hum of Holmes's chemical apparatus. A few moments later our landlady presented a note, delivered by a breathless college messenger. Holmes snatched it, the crisp paper crackling as he unfolded it. His brow furrowed as he read, and without a word he passed it to me. "Good heavens, Holmes, it's from Ashworth. He claims he has been robbed," said Victor Trevor. "The game, my dear Trevor, has taken a most material turn. The phantom has developed a taste for property. Let us make haste," explained Sherlock Holmes. We arrived at Trinity to find Lord Ashworth's rooms in disarray. The young man paced the turkey carpet, his usual arrogance replaced by pale, twitching fury. The air hung heavy with his agitation, a stark contrast to last night's peculiar, acrid scent. A college servant, a quiet, stoop-shouldered fellow named Davies, was attempting to restore order near the hearth, the soft crackle of the fire the only calm sound in the room. "It's gone! The Ashworth signet ring! It was on the mantelpiece, right there. My father will have my head. That thing appeared again, a ghastly shimmering light by the window. When it vanished, so had the ring," said Lord Edmund Ashworth. Holmes paid little heed to Ashworth's panic. He moved directly to the mantelpiece, his eyes sweeping over its surface, taking in every detail of the void where the ring had been. He then knelt, his long nose nearly touching the floorboards, and sniffed the air like a prize hound on a scent. After a moment he rose, holding up a single speck of dust on his fingertip for my inspection. "Mr. Davies," stated Sherlock Holmes. The servant started, dropping a book with a soft thud. "Sir," Mr. Davies answered. "You were in the rooms this morning before Lord Ashworth awoke, were you not?" replied Sherlock Holmes. "To draw the curtains and light the fire, sir, as I do every morning. I saw nothing amiss," responded Mr. Davies. Holmes watched him for a long moment, his gaze so intense that the man began to shift his weight from one foot to the other, the floorboards groaning softly beneath him. Then Holmes turned back to me. "Observe, Trevor," observed Sherlock Holmes. His eyes gleamed. "The objective is revealed. These theatrics serve a purpose. We've been so focused on the ghost's nature we neglected to ask what it aimed to achieve." "You mean the haunting was a distraction? A cover for this theft?" replied Victor Trevor. A thin smile touched his lips. "Precisely. The apparition is a tool, a brilliantly conceived piece of misdirection. While our eyes, and more importantly Lord Ashworth's, were fixed upon the spectral light, A very corporeal hand was at work. "The scent I detected last night, it was phosphorus, I am almost certain. A simple chemical trick to create a convincing glow. But the logic behind its deployment, the psychology of it, that is something more complex," observed Sherlock Holmes. Leaving Ashworth to his lamentations, we descended the stone staircase. Holmes, however, did not head for the college gates, but turned instead towards the porter's lodge, the formidable oak-panelled office that served as the college's nerve centre. Inside, a stern-faced head porter, with impressive side whiskers, sat behind a high counter, observing the comings and goings with a practised eye. The air smelled of beeswax and old paper. "Good morning. We are here regarding a matter in Lord Ashworth's rooms. A valuable signet ring has been reported stolen," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Stolen, Mr. Holmes? Or misplaced? Young gentlemen are prone to carelessness. And these stories of his? Ghosts? More likely too much port wine, if you ask me," remarked head porter. "Perhaps. Nevertheless, has anyone been admitted to this staircase overnight who was not a resident? Any unusual visitors noted in your log?" Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "The logs are clear. No one enters or leaves Trinity after hours without my knowing it. If his lordship's ring is gone, the culprit is to be found within these walls, not without," responded head porter. Holmes nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He thanked the porter, and we stepped back out into the courtyard, the heavy oak door closing behind us with a definitive thud. "This is no undergraduate prank, Trevor. The mind behind this is disciplined and astute. The problem has shifted from one of mere observation to one of pure logic. I believe it is time I consulted an expert in that particular field. A conversation with Professor Finch is most decidedly in order," replied Sherlock Holmes. The theft of the Ashworth heirloom had shifted the entire complexion of the case. What had begun as a curious puzzle, a matter of undergraduate mischief, now possessed the grim weight of true criminality. As we strode across the manicured lawns of Trinity, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots was the only sound that broke the afternoon quiet. Holmes walked with his head bowed, his hands clasped behind his back, a storm of concentration upon his features. "The facts are a cloud of smoke, Watson. We have a phantom that is no phantom, and a theft that is no common burglary. The two are linked, yet the cord that binds them remains invisible to me," Sherlock Holmes responded. He stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed upon the ivy-clad walls of an older, more secluded quadrangle. A sudden resolution hardened his expression. "There is but one man in Cambridge whose mind delights in such knots. Come, we shall consult Professor Finch," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We found Professor Finch in his study, a man who lived and breathed logic. The chamber, walled by towering bookshelves, stood as a fortress against the outside world. The air smelled of old paper and leather. A gentle fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth a welcome comfort. In the corner, a great mahogany clock marked the passage of time, with a steady, rhythmic tick. The professor himself, a frail man with eyes that shone with a fierce intelligence, listened without interruption as Holmes laid out the particulars of the Trinity Apparition. "A fascinating problem indeed, Holmes. Quite intriguing," replied Professor Finch. His voice was thin and dry, like the rustle of ancient parchment. He steepled his fingers, his gaze directed not at Holmes, but at some distant point in the middle air. "You say the apparition serves to frighten, but now it serves to conceal a theft. Which, I ask you, is the true purpose, and which is the convenient mask?" answered Professor Finch. "That is the very heart of it, Professor. I believe the hauntings were a prelude, a piece of theatre designed to establish a pattern of the supernatural, so that when the theft occurred, it would be attributed to a ghost, not a man," replied Sherlock Holmes. "A sound hypothesis. But let us dissect the performance itself. To create a ghost requires method. Wires, perhaps? Mirrors? A confederate? Such trickery is not born of a moment's inspiration. It requires planning, knowledge, perhaps even rehearsal. Tell me, do you suppose this to be an entirely original deception?" remarked Professor Finch. Holmes leaned forward, his apathy vanishing, replaced by the familiar, keen glimmer of the hunt. The professor's question hung in the quiet room, seeming to alter the very shape of the puzzle. Original, I had assumed, but why should I? Human ingenuity is finite, particularly in the commission of such elaborate frauds, replied Sherlock Holmes. Precisely. A great college is a repository of history, of traditions, and, one might say, of well-remembered pranks and deceptions. Is it not possible that your phantom is not a new invention, but rather a revival of an old one? A trick borrowed from the past, answered Professor Finch. Holmes shot to his feet, his lethargy utterly gone. A fire had been lit behind his eyes. He began to pace before the hearth, the old floorboards groaning softly under his energetic stride. The professor's simple logical query had provided the key not to the solution, but to the path that might lead to it. Of course. My word, of course. Watson, we have been blind. We have been examining the crime, when we should have been examining the method. If this is a recurring trick, a piece of college folklore brought to life, there may well be a record of it, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. His voice was sharp, with newfound purpose. He turned to our host, his gratitude clear. Professor, I am eternally in your debt. You have turned the lamp upon the path. Watson, we must to the college archives at once. We are no longer hunting a ghost, but the echo of one, declared Sherlock Holmes. The conversation with Professor Finch had ignited a fresh blaze in Holmes's mind. He set off at such a pace that Trevor and I were forced to hurry to keep up. As our footsteps echoed from the ancient stone walls of the Cambridge lanes, Holmes finally revealed his new course of action. We cannot merely chase the ghost of the present, my friends. We must exhume the ghosts of the past. Precedent, Trevor. Deception is rarely new. It is old cloth cut to a modern pattern. To the college archives, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Our inquiries at the main library, however, met with frustrating dead ends. As the records we sought were not in general circulation, we stood for a moment in the great, vaulted reading room, the air thick, with the scent of leather and polish. Just as our hopes began to fade, a familiar, clear voice cut through the scholarly silence. If you are seeking the truly forgotten history of Trinity, gentlemen, you are fishing in the wrong pond. The official library is for display. The real repository is far less grand, Miss Charlotte Winfield answered. It was Miss Winfield, a book tucked under her arm. She led us from the grand hall down a narrow, winding staircase I had never noticed, the air growing cooler and smelling of damp stone. A heavy oak door, studded with iron, barred our way. With a word to a passing porter, she procured a large, rusted key, and the lock protested with a loud groan as it turned. We entered a tomb of forgotten knowledge. Dust motes danced in a single beam of light from a high grimy window. An absolute silence reigned, broken only by our soft footsteps on dusty floorboards. Shelves sagged under the weight of vellum-bound ledgers and crumbling folios. Holmes surveyed the room, his voice a low hum of anticipation. Excellent, Miss Winfield. You have a talent for unearthing the obscure. Now, we look for accounts of student mischief, disciplinary actions, or unexplained phenomena from the 17th and 18th centuries. The age of alchemy and superstition would be fertile ground for such a ruse, replied Sherlock Holmes. For nearly an hour we worked, the only sound being the dry crackle of ancient parchment. It was Holmes, naturally, who found it. He let out a sharp cry of triumph, holding up a thin, leather-bound journal. It was a college master's private diary, dated 1788. Listen to this. Another frightful visitation upon the rooms of young Mr. Albright. The lad swears a spectral mist did fill his chambers, from which a ghastly silent face did form and stare. He reports the spectre left behind a foul scent, and that its passing was marked by a brief, cold fire that danced upon his escritoire without burning it. Good heavens, Holmes! It's the very same trick. But a cold fire? Surely that's just a bit of dramatic license from the writer. A man in 1788 wouldn't know how to describe such a thing scientifically, replied Victor Trevor. Holmes turned, his eyes alight with an intensity that was almost startling in the dim room. He tapped the page with a long, thin finger. A flourish. Trevor, you see, but you do not observe. This is not poetry. It is a technical description, and an uncommonly precise one. It is the very heart of the matter. While they lacked the language of modern chemistry, they described what they saw. A cold fire, a luminescence without heat. Sherlock Holmes responded. But what does that prove, Holmes? It still sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. How can a fire be cold? Victor Trevor said. Holmes's voice rang with conviction in the dusty silence. It means our ghost is not a ghost at all, but a chemist. And if my hypothesis is correct, it is a trick we can replicate. Words on a page are no longer sufficient. We must move from theory to practice, replied Sherlock Holmes. He closed the ancient book with a decisive snap that sent a puff of dust into the single beam of light. His expression was one of absolute certainty, a look that I knew preceded some of his most daring and brilliant demonstrations. The debate was over, and the time for experiment was at hand. Our return from the archives was marked by a tense silence. The disagreement with Trevor still hung in the air, thick and unwelcome as a London fog. I found myself positioned uncomfortably between my friend's obsessive focus and Trevor's blunt pragmatism. In the makeshift laboratory, the only sounds were the clink of glass vials and the low hiss of a Bunsen burner. Holmes's movements were precise, yet I could detect an underlying agitation I knew well. It was the precursor to either a brilliant breakthrough or a spectacular failure. The phosphorus, Trevor. The account was quite specific, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice cut through the quiet, clipped and lacking its usual confident timbre. Trevor passed him the jar with a heavy sigh, the scrape of glass on the wooden bench unnaturally loud. Leaning against a bookshelf, his arms crossed, he was the very picture of profound skepticism. You are chasing shadows, Holmes. This is a recipe for a theatrical puff of smoke, nothing more. A prankster's formula, replied Victor Trevor. Holmes remained silent, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he carefully measured the fine, pale powder into the beaker, then added a clear liquid. The mixture began to fizz gently, releasing a sharp, unpleasant odor that pricked at my nostrils. Despite Trevor's doubts, I confess my own hopes were pinned on Holmes's success as he moved the beaker over the waiting flame. We all leaned forward, our breath held in anticipation. The result was not the ethereal glow Holmes had predicted. I recoiled as a sudden, violent crack split the air. A flash of bilious green light threw our shadows into stark relief against the walls, followed instantly by a thick, acrid smoke that billowed upwards, forcing a cough from my throat and obscuring everything. The sharp report was followed by the tinkle of shattering glass upon the workbench, and the smoke coiled towards the ceiling, carrying with it the undeniable stench of failure. Holmes stood rigid, staring at the black, sticky residue that now coated his apparatus. A low growl of frustration escaped his lips, a sound so rare it was startling. It was a profoundly unsettling sight. Sherlock Holmes, the master of logic, momentarily defeated by simple chemistry. For a moment, the great engine of his mind had sputtered and stalled. Impossible. The elements were correct. The proportions. I have missed something fundamental, deduced Sherlock Holmes. His fist crashed down on the table with a resounding thud, sending tremors through the remaining glassware. The change was so abrupt it was almost shocking. As quickly as the frustration had appeared, it was replaced by a familiar, predatory energy. He spun around, his eyes alight with a new and desperate purpose, and snatched his greatcoat from its hook by the door. To the library! At once. I have been a fool. I have read the words but missed the meaning. The answer is not in the formula, but in the context. We hurried through the echoing stone corridors of the college, our footsteps a rapid, sharp counterpoint to the sedate atmosphere. I exchanged a glance with Trevor, who merely shook his head in exasperation, but I knew better than to question Holmes in this state. Within the vast, hushed cathedral of the library, he located the heavy, vellum-bound alchemical text, and laid it upon a lectern with a solid thud, the ancient pages rustling like dry leaves. For a quarter of an hour he was silent, his long, thin finger tracing the Latin script. The scrape of Trevor's boot as he shifted his weight impatiently was the only sound, but I, for my part, was mesmerized by the sheer force of my friend's concentration. Suddenly, Holmes gave a sharp, triumphant cry that cut through the library's reverent hush. "Of course! Trevor, look here! What a monumental simpleton I have been! I saw the word ignis, and thought only of chemical combustion. But see this diagram? And the phrase that follows, ut speculum lutem captet et formam proiciat, so that the mirror may capture the light and project the shape," Sherlock Holmes noted. He tapped the page emphatically, the sound sharp in the quiet room. His earlier frustration was completely forgotten, his voice now electric with the thrill of rediscovery. "It is not a potion to be brewed, but a surface to be coated. The phosphorus is not the fuel, but the canvas." Our alchemist was a physicist, a master of optics. He was creating not a chemical vapor, but a simple projection. A primitive magic lantern, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Back in the laboratory, the energy was transformed. The previous tension had evaporated, replaced by a shared, focused anticipation. With a sharp clatter, Holmes swept the shards of the shattered beaker into a waste bin. He then worked swiftly, coating a small, polished silver tray with a thin layer of the phosphorescent powder, positioning a large magnifying lens before it, and behind that, a single, carefully controlled candle flame. He adjusted the lens, his brow furrowed. Then, as the heat from the candle gently warmed the silver plate, a miracle occurred. Upon the opposite wall, a shimmering, luminous shape began to form. I felt a genuine shiver trace its way down my spine. Though I knew it to be a trick, the effect was profoundly unsettling as it coalesced into a wavering, man-like figure of pale, ghostly light, a perfect replica of the apparition described by Lord Ashworth. "My God, Holmes, it is the very thing itself," Victor Trevor replied. Trevor breathed the words in a whisper of pure awe. Holmes stood back, the faint, spectral light playing across his sharp features, his expression one of pure, cold, intellectual satisfaction. It was the look of a man who has not merely solved a puzzle but conquered it. The science is sound, the trick is revealed. Now all that remains is to catch the magician, observed Sherlock Holmes. He blew out the candle, and the phantom vanished with a soft hiss of the wick, plunging the room back into near darkness. He turned from the workbench, and in the gloom I could see the hard, determined set of his jaw. The theorist's work was done. The man of action was now ready. "We have the means. Tomorrow night, we shall prepare a suitable reception for our spectral visitor. It is high time he was introduced to his audience," explained Sherlock Holmes. I confess, my own heart hammered against my ribs as we sat in the oppressive darkness of Lord Ashworth's rooms. The silence was so profound that every sound was magnified. The groan of ancient timbers, the distant chime of a college clock, the nervous fluttering rasp of Ashworth's own breath. The man himself, stripped of his usual arrogance, was huddled in a wingback chair. Beside me, Victor Trevor was a statue of coiled anticipation, but Holmes, a mere shadow near the hearth, was utterly still. The only light came from the faint gas lamps in the court below, casting long, distorted fingers across the floorboards. "Patience, gentlemen. Our phantom keeps a predictable schedule. He has established a pattern. and a man driven by such methodical purpose will not deviate now," replied Sherlock Holmes. His voice was a low murmur, yet it carried an authority that calmed the air. He had laid his trap with meticulous care. A fine, near-invisible silk thread stretched taut across the threshold of the bedroom, connected to a small silver bell placed upon a pewter plate. It was simple, yet, as Holmes had assured us, entirely sufficient. The minutes stretched into an eternity, fraying my nerves to their breaking point. The clock's ticking seemed to slow, each second an age. Then, a sound, a low moan, seeming to emanate from the very stones of the college, echoed in the chamber. I heard Ashworth draw a sharp, choked gasp beside me. Almost immediately, a faint ethereal luminescence bloomed upon the wall opposite the bedroom, swirling like mist in a jar. A cold dread washed over me, the supernatural effect so utterly convincing in the oppressive quiet. The bedroom door, which we had left slightly ajar, began to swing inward. The agonizingly slow creak of its hinges set my teeth on edge, each inch of movement punctuated by the groaning wood. A figure, draped in white and shimmering in the unholy glow, drifted into the room. For a moment, despite all of Holmes's assurances, the sight of that tall spectral form chilled me to the bone. It paid us no mind, gliding silently towards the mantelpiece where Ashworth's family signet ring lay. Just as a pale hand reached for the ring, a sharp, metallic clang shattered the quiet. The figure froze. In the same instant I heard the scrape of a match, and its sudden flare illuminated Holmes's face as he lit the oil lamp. With a soft whoosh, the wick caught, and the room was flooded with a warm, uncompromising light. "That will be quite enough, Mr. Davies. The performance is over," Sherlock Holmes said. The ghost was no ghost at all. The spectral sheet slithered to the floor with a soft rustle, revealing the college gyp, Mr. Davies, tangled in the fine silk thread at his ankle. Caught in the lamplight, his face was a mask of astonishment and fury. In his hand, he clutched a small lantern fitted with a curious chemical preparation, the source of the ghastly light. How did you?" Mr. Davies answered. Davies stammered, his usual composure shattered. Lord Ashworth, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief, finally found his voice. "You, my own gyp! The insolence!" said Lord Ashworth. "By Jove, we have him! Well done, Holmes, but how did he enter?" "The main door has been bolted since dusk," Victor Trevor said. "A gyp of your long standing, Mr. Davies, would be privy to the college's little secrets. For instance, the old servants' passage behind the Tudor panelling, sealed in my grandfather's time but clearly not forgotten by you. It allowed you to bypass the main door and emerge from the bedroom, enhancing your spectral illusion," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes gestured towards a section of dark wood panelling near the bedroom door. I now saw what I had missed. Faint, almost imperceptible seams that betrayed a hidden doorway. The sheer audacity of using the college's own forgotten architecture for his crime was breathtaking. It was a clever ruse, I shall grant you that. The hauntings were never the primary objective, were they? They were merely a rehearsal, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Davies's shoulders slumped in defeat. He looked from Holmes's penetrating gaze to Ashworth's dumbfounded expression, a bitter sneer twisting his lips. A rehearsal, yes. To test the response. To see how long it took for his lordship to cry out, how long for the porters to arrive. Each time I timed it. I established a reliable window. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of panic and confusion where no one would notice a small object going missing. Tonight was to be the grand performance. Mr. Davies said. The confession hung in the air. It was a testament to a crime of astonishing patience and audacity, where psychology had served as the most cunning of lockpicks. Soon, the heavy tread of the college porters could be heard on the stairs. They entered without ceremony, and led Davies away, his footsteps shuffling in defeat, leaving his face a grim portrait of failed ingenuity in my memory. When the room was quiet once more, Trevor turned to my friend, his eyes alight with an admiration that mirrored my own. "Holmes, that was simply magnificent. I saw the ghost with my own eyes, yet you saw only the man. To deduce the rehearsals, the timings, it's not just logic, it's artistry." "Truly, it is beyond belief," responded Victor Trevor. The events of the preceding night had left an electric hum in the air of our little clubroom, with the culprit apprehended, and the college breathing a collective sigh of relief. We had gathered before a merrily crackling fire. The scent of old leather and pipe tobacco filled the space, a comforting aroma after the chill of our recent adventure. Victor Trevor, his face flushed with success, raised his glass. "A toast! To Holmes! By Jove, the man who saw through a ghost with naught but a pocket watch and the sharpest wits in Cambridge," Victor Trevor replied. We echoed the sentiment, our glasses clinking softly in the firelight. Professor Finch, who had joined us at Holmes's invitation, nodded slowly, his expression one of deep contemplation. It was he who broke the subsequent silence, his voice, the dry rustle of academic papers. "A remarkable piece of work, Mr. Holmes. Truly. But I confess, the motive behind the prolonged charade, the weeks of these so-called hauntings, it still seems an unnecessary theatricality," Professor Finch said. Holmes, who had been staring into the flames, turned his head. A faint, sharp smile played upon his lips. He rose from his chair and stood upon the hearthrug, his tall, lean figure casting a long shadow across the room. "Because, Professor, this was not about terror, but timing. Each apparition was a rehearsal, testing the servant's response. The first, 4 minutes. The second, 3 minutes, 50 seconds. By the third and fourth, Lord Ashworth and the household had fallen into a predictable pattern of resigned annoyance," stated Sherlock Holmes. He began to pace, his footsteps soft but deliberate on the old rug. His voice took on the quality of a lecturer, clear and incisive. The haunting became routine, an expected disruption. On the night of the theft, our culprit knew he had precisely 4 minutes from the moment Ashworth fled his rooms to the moment a servant would arrive. Professor Finch nodded slowly, his fingers steepled before him. "A window of opportunity, carved from fear itself," replied Professor Finch. "Exactly. 4 minutes to force the lock on the desk, secure the heirloom, and replace it with the duplicate." "It was not a haunting. It was a meticulously rehearsed burglary, with the ghost serving as the starting pistol," replied Sherlock Holmes. It was Miss Winfield who spoke next, her voice thoughtful and precise, cutting through our collective astonishment. "But the ring itself, Holmes, was it merely its monetary value that drove the thief? Or is there more to the story of Lord Ashworth's signet?" said Miss Charlotte Winfield. Holmes stopped his pacing and retrieved a small chamois leather pouch from his waistcoat pocket. With a flick of his wrist he emptied its contents onto the table. A heavy gold ring, bearing an intricate crest, spun with a soft whirring sound before coming to rest with a solid clink, its surface gleaming in the firelight. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, went around the room. "Its value is ancestral, not merely monetary, Miss Winfield." This made it the ideal target, inflicting maximum personal injury upon Lord Ashworth, with minimal risk of the item being traced and sold. As for its recovery, I found it nestled within a hollowed-out volume on Peloponnesian history in the college library. An appropriately obscure hiding place for a man of some classical learning, if not moral fibre. I shall ensure it is returned to the master's office forthwith," Sherlock Holmes responded. The grandfather clock in Professor Finch's office ticked solemnly as we entered that afternoon. A distant college bell chimed. Finch stood silhouetted against the tall window, gazing out over the ancient courtyard. On his polished desk gleamed the recovered ring. "Mr. Holmes, the college is in your debt. I have spent my life studying the logical structures of the ancient world, of Aristotle and Euclid. I believed I understood the full measure of human reason." Professor Finch answered. He turned from the window, and for the first time, I saw not a trace of academic superiority in his eyes, but something akin to genuine awe. His voice was low, and held a note of profound respect. "But your method, it is something new. You treat the chaotic tapestry of life as a solvable equation. You find the logic where the rest of us see only madness. It is a formidable, and I dare say, a revolutionary intellect you possess. I shall watch your career with the greatest interest." Holmes gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, accepting the praise not as flattery, but as a simple statement of fact. As we left the quiet sanctity of the master's office, the heavy oak door closing with a soft thud behind us, and stepped back out into the bustling Cambridge streets, I had the distinct impression that Professor Finch would not be the last great mind to be startled by the singular genius of my friend.